Welcome everyone to the 2022 JETAA Chicago Career Development Workshop. Today we'll be having two speakers discuss two very different aspects of career development that are relevant to the JET alumni uh, population or community. So first we'll have Emily Frank from Career Catalyst discuss addressing anxiety around the job search. Um, and we'll also have Jenny Brown-Rocheleau discuss her post-JET education and career path becoming a teacher again in the US, and talking a little bit about comparing Japanese language education experiences with those in language teaching experiences in the US. So two very different aspects of the post-JET professional development trajectory. So if it doesn't cover exactly the concerns and questions you have, don't worry. At the end, we'll have a panel discussion where each of us can ask some questions to the speakers about aspects of professional life after JET. And if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. You can either direct them right to me so I can pass them to the panel, or save them till the end, whatever you'd like to do so that you don't forget the question that you want to ask. And if you have a question that's more for the whole group, then feel free to ask those as well. But yeah, any questions you have that you think present company would have some knowledge about professional life after JET, please feel free to ask. Please stick around for the panel discussion, and afterward, our president, Gabe, will make some announcements about other JETAA Chicago events. And we'll probably stick around to take a picture of all the attendees. So that's one of our traditions. So yeah. I didn't really introduce the speakers, but I'll give them a chance to give a self-introduction when we get to each of their discussions. So I look forward to hearing what they have to say. I hope everyone else is excited to hear our discussants, and I hope you have good questions at the end. So once again, welcome everyone. And I will now pass it off to our first speaker, Emily Frank from Career Catalyst. So I will do my best to be a good Zoom moderator and try to pin Emily. There we go. Okay, and Emily, if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let me get my slideshow going here. Oops, and I got too excited. All right, so thank you all for attending today, and do know that I'm really glad to take your questions at the end. But I know that a lot of what's going on these days is just kind of a lot of free-floating anxiety about things like finding the right job, being successful at work, being happy at work, making other people around you happy, and just kind of figuring out what's going on in terms of your job and all of that. And so for one thing, I do want to normalize that. It's true of a lot of us. And I think it's a little more true if you're more recently back from Japan. But even if you've been back for a few years, it can feel kind of overwhelming and worrisome these days. And so don't worry. We're going to cover a lot of really good stuff today. And I definitely welcome your questions at the end. So again, on the topic of normalizing, these are just some pretty weird times that we're in right now. If you are pretty recently back from Japan, it's really normal to feel extremely kind of overwhelmed and confused and not clear what you want to do with your career. I did all kinds of wacky things after I got back. I went to cooking school, which was great because I'm a lifelong vegetarian and I had to do things like bone a lamb. That was really horrifying. I tried translation. I worked in retail, I just kind of all over the place. So that's actually a really normal path if you're recently back from Japan. If you've been back for a while, I think there's still a lot of anxiety about just what's happening in the world right now. And some of us were not lucky enough to happen into jobs post Japan that made sense for us. And so I know that there's also a lot of kind of career transition that people can go through, and that will continue to be a factor for much of your life. Honestly, people change careers. There's not actually very good data on how often people change careers because it's kind of hard to define that. The example I always give is that if you've been a teacher for 20 years and then you become like a principal, for example, is that a job change or a career change? Depends on your definition. So that's kind of why we don't have clean data about career change, but we know that it happens. And also, let's not forget that we're living in this strange new world of menacing feeling viruses. I've said post-COVID here, but of course, we're still in COVID. It's just not as anxiety producing as it was. And I know that that changed things for a lot of folks. I actually was just at an event recently and ran into some 5-year jets. They hadn't intended to be 5-year jets, but they got caught up in the COVID stuff that happened. And so their time in Japan was somewhat artificially extended. So there's some stress around that. And then there's stuff like the state of the world in regards to politics. There's global unrest. There's the economy. Are we in a recession? Are we going into a recession? All of that craziness. And so we're all just a little anxious, let's say. So this is actually some really solid psychology here. The truth is that when we go through something traumatic in a really big way, like a global pandemic, we all get kind of hypervigilant. It's not very sustainable, though. And so we sort of have weird little peaks and valleys of hypervigilance, but it's exhausting as well. And going through it has also shown us how quickly things can change. I actually, in early 2020, was working in a co-working space. And one of the other people in the space came in and said, "Ooh, there's all this research about like in the year with that ends in 20, terrible things happen, you know." And she was talking about it. I was rolling my eyes and thinking that was ridiculous. What on earth could possibly make a big enough change that it would impact our lives? And then I found out. So we know that everything is a little bit less solid than we may have thought before. In terms of work, this means that a lot of us are in these things, in these sort of phases. And I know that the quiet quitting and resignation stuff are a little bit older now, but I do think that people are more inclined these days to make decisions based on things like their values as opposed to sort of simple economic necessity. And they can overlap, and they often do. But I do think the values part of the conversation is a little bit more front of mind. And I think that's actually a really good thing, even if it makes the process a little bit harder. So one of the things that I find pretty unique about folks who do JET is that we have some fairly distinctive traits, right? For one thing, at a fairly early age, we all thought, sure, I'll move overseas, which is unusual. You probably have noticed that in your friends, that most of them maybe thought you were a little bit crazy for doing that, except the ones who applied with you. There's a stripe of bravery that Jets have. There's a pretty clear desire to be of service to the broader world, much higher degree of comfort with uncertainty than most folks have, and obviously a commitment to education. Now, my last one about a desire not to teach is clearly not true of everyone. But what I see when people are in states of career confusion, that it's typically because they sort of went to Japan thinking maybe I'll teach and left thinking I don't want to teach. And so that's kind of why that is there. There are some patterns that we tend to fall into after JET in terms of career paths, but I don't want to spend too much time in that because, first of all, I don't want to dictate anything to you. And second of all, everyone, of course, has a unique journey. So I don't want to tell you what you should go into and what you shouldn't. But I did want to tell you a little bit about me as well. right now I'm covering myself up, but if you can see my cursor, this is me here in the blue, down here, kind of middle of the pack here. So yes, I am also a Jet, but I am very much your senpai. I was in Hokkaido from 93 to 96. Back then, it was 3 years was your max. My office did ask me to stay, but I opted not to. I am in Denver right now, and then I kind of had a fairly traditional pre-jet path. I majored in East Asian studies, studied a lot of Japanese language. I had actually done my junior year abroad in Kyoto, and my homestay mother is from Hokkaido. So when I was looking at placement, I actually requested Hokkaido. If you request Hokkaido, you will get placed in Hokkaido. Not many of us are crazy enough to do that. So this is my little group here. Post-jet, I mentioned that I did a lot of things. The worst thing I did was I dabbled in translation work at a law firm. I'm not making this up. We were translating documents about rubber patent infringement. Gates and Bondi were engaged in apparently some very bitter patent dispute. I signed some non-disclosure agreements, but honestly, I could not disclose anything to you because I don't remotely understand anything I translated. It's all about bandwidths, and I have no idea what it was. Did not like that. I tried hosting some tour groups. In fact, the one time in my entire life I've been inside a Walmart. It's because I had a group of Japanese students and teachers. We were in Loveland, Colorado. And on the way back to Denver, there was one of those Walmart mega stores, and they really, really, really wanted to go in. So we went in, and they were delighted, and I was a little more horrified. I mentioned cooking school. I worked in a bookstore, and then eventually, through going to a career counselor, I found my way to grad school. Grad school was a really great fit for me. I realized when I was kind of in my 20s that I had always had this vague idea that I wanted to do something related to mental health, psychology, or whatever. And so wound up in a professional counseling program. So that is a little bit about me. I don't want to belabor that. And I want to get through my stuff relatively quickly so that Jenny can go. But what can you do if you're in this state of career confusion and conflict, or even just a transition? Well, I really recommend that you start by doing some clarification of your values and really think about what you need from a job. We tend, as a group, to think about what our skills are, which is why I wound up in a translation gig that I just hated. So try to separate the skill discussion a little bit. A lot of that is because skills are just by definition things that you can learn. So if you don't know how to use Slack and you wind up in a job that uses Slack, you can figure it out, right? Slack is basically a combination of social media and email. It's not that hard. You'll figure it out. So skills are things that we can definitely find ways for you to build on. But your values and your needs and your interests are pretty inherent to you. They'll change a little bit over time because you'll change a little bit over time. But if we can really get clear on what those two things are, then we have a better sense of where to go. And I actually have a values worksheet that I just realized I failed to send Rurik before this. I will get that sent out to just kind of walk you through what some of those values are, just a really clear way to define them. But also think about those needs from a job, not just financially, although that's definitely a piece of it, but think about things like, do you need health insurance? Do you need a hybrid work situation? Excuse me. Do you need something that lets you be creative? So your needs can be pretty wide ranging. Certainly you want to cover your financial needs, but don't forget that there are other pieces of the puzzle there. Now, in terms of your skills and accomplishments, really get clear on kind of some of what you have accomplished in the past. And I think having that a little bit front of mind will also remind you that if there are skills that you need to learn, you absolutely can. And again, I would just remind you, if you're feeling unsure about accomplishing things and that sort of that stuff, At this stage in your life, you have already accomplished significantly more than your peers because you have uprooted your life, lived in another country, taught in a system or translated or whatever your role was, worked within a system that's not really yours. You weren't that familiar with it, and made a life for yourself. You had to figure out all kinds of things that could be really overwhelming, like how to pay your bills and where to go grocery shopping and all of those kinds of things. And the truth is that most of your peers don't actually have those skills. So we know you have skills. We know you can build on them. We know you've accomplished things. And we get to figure out what is really next for you. Now, the trickiest one is my last point here about redefining yourself by letting go of past identities. And this is, I think, more true if you had thought perhaps that you really wanted to be a teacher or had a different path like that was very defined in your head. And then you sort of ran up against this new reality, which is that thing doesn't make sense to you. Or because of the state of the world right now, you want something different. So I like to think of a life story kind of being composed of chapters. And so if you're looking at a new identity now, if you're looking at a larger career change, if you're looking to shift gears in a pretty major way, doesn't mean you're not who you were before. It simply means that you're writing a new chapter and you really get to kind of lean into what this next definition of you is going to be. So I know this is fine to talk about, but a little bit more complex to actually do. So here are some starting points for you. Really think through all of this stuff about what you like, what you don't like, what you want, all of that kind of stuff. And I've started it with what you don't like or want. It doesn't matter if you start there or with what you do like or want, but really capture those things. Think about, like, who are you? What do you need? What do you want? What does it look like? And then really think through what you do in your free time that will really help inform you. So what kinds of things do you watch? What kinds of things do you read? If you're standing in line at the grocery store and there's a rack of magazines there, what are you always going to pick up to thumb through? This will help kind of guide you towards things that are more generally interesting to you. If you really want to continue in some way to be of service to your broader community, think about some causes that matter to you. Think about some places you would like for your work to be happening in the world. This doesn't have to be necessarily working for a nonprofit, but what are the nonprofits that you support? What feels really important to you? And this, again, goes back to your values, but really think about choices you make in terms of things like where you're going to spend your money and that kind of thing. And then have some fun remembering what you wanted when you were a kid. This is particularly helpful if you had patterns of things that you wanted or something that you always said. For many years, I told people that I wanted to be a veterinarian when I grew up, and it was just because I liked animals. It wasn't because I was good at science, because I'm not. It was because I liked that idea of helping. And I especially liked the idea of helping people who didn't really have a voice in the world, which is part of what I do with some of the auxiliary work that I do. So I do some pro bono appointments. And what I like to do with those pro bono sessions is work with people who are less advantaged in the world. So for instance, I have 3 clients now who identify as trans. And I probably have 7 or 8 clients now who are neurodiverse somehow, ADHD or autism spectrum, something like that. And it's the same kind of reason I wanted to be a veterinarian, because these are folks who are more disadvantaged in the world. They sort of have less of a seat at the table. So that continues to be really important to me. I just don't ever have to perform surgery, which is a good thing. This is a good thing for me and for the animals. So sometimes what you wanted to do as a child will simply steer you in a direction, but sometimes it might inform it more directly. So if you had always wanted to be a teacher, then you get to think about what that looked like in your 7-year-old mind, for example, and what pieces of that you might translate into something new. And then really have a chunk of time that you spend figuring out how all of these pieces might fit together. I'm really big on brainstorming because what it lets you do is access your brain without editing. Write stuff down and put it aside. Just spend an hour or so just writing things down. When you're done, take a walk, make some lunch, do something that disengages your brain from that activity, and then come back to it. And you can spend a chunk of time after you've done your brainstorming, kind of changing your mindset, doing something entirely different. And then when you get back to it, your eyes will be a little bit fresher. And what you'll look to do with the brainstorming activity is figure out any pieces that are really standing out to you, or if there are any patterns to this process. Now, that's all well and good. That might not be super duper helpful to you given where you are right now. So I do want to let you know that I'm really happy to answer questions you have around this, and to help you figure out what some of that brainstorming stuff might look like. And here is my contact information. So if you want to read any of my blogs, I have kind of a lot of blog topics because I feel like I need to generate new content. And so a lot of what I blog about is based on what I've read that week or a question that one of my clients had, what have you. So I do have a bunch of information listed on my website, and I'm always available via email. And I'm not 100% sure what's happening over at US JETAA. If you're not a member, go join, because they are in the process of getting a new president. Once their new person is installed, they should have some money for additional free career counseling sessions with me. When that happens, I will have a link that I can send. So, I'm happy to do those free appointments for JET alums as well. So that is a very quick kind of overview of what you can do with this free-floating anxiety that I know a lot of you are experiencing. If you have a clearer sense of what you might want to do, or if you're thinking you might want to do something educational, then I think Jenny will have some really great topics for you there. So I am done with my part, and I don't know, Rurik, do you want me to turn it back over to you, or shall I turn it right over to Jenny?
I'll take it for a second.
Perfect.
Yeah, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, applause. There we go. Yeah, excellent talk. I do want to say through JETAA Chicago, if you're a member of JETAA Chicago, then we do have a set number of one-on-one counseling sessions that our Treasury, I guess, is providing for. So if you're a member of JETAA Chicago, then we'll have a way to get in contact so you can sign up for one of those free for you counseling sessions.
I didn't want to talk out of class. I wasn't sure where you all were with that process, but yes, that too.
Yeah. I just don't know how to talk about it very well because there's money involved, but it's not coming from the client. So yeah, if you're interested in that, we'll have a way to get you hooked up with Emily so that you can get your counseling session underway. But yeah, excellent advice. And yeah, I hope everyone's sort of thinking this over. If you have follow-up questions that you can ask today, then great. If you want to stew on it and talk to Emily later, then think about that too. I think we're at a really great pace. I'm going to give everyone maybe 2 to 3 minutes break if you want to stay off camera, get up, stretch, do whatever. Go ahead, and then I will pass it over to Jenny. All right, we'll start rolling back in now. So whenever we're all ready, I'll pass it over to Jenny. So let me pin you. There we go. All right. Are you good, Jenny? Can I?
I'm good, Rurik.
There you go. Okay. Just want to make sure sound was good. All right. So if you have a PowerPoint to share or anything to share on your screen, go ahead and you have time for a little self-introduction, and then go ahead. I look forward to hearing your talk.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. I just want to check, can everybody hear me all right?
Sounds good.
Okay, excellent. I'm just going to move the window around a little bit so I can see the chat and folks' faces while I'm sharing the screen. Awesome. So good morning, everyone. It's my very great pleasure to join you today. My name is Jenny Brown-Rocheleau, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about my post-JET education and career path, some lessons I've learned, and I'm very happy to chat with you and answer questions. And I'll also be sharing my slides in the chat afterwards as well. So I'm going to start with just giving a little bit of background about myself. I'll talk a little bit about the university and college ESL landscape and some tips for returning to academia. So just to start off a little bit about me, I was a JET ALT in Kyoto City from 2010 to 2013. Really, really fun times. I know we all being on the JET program have such different experiences depending on where we're placed with our Board of Education. So I just wanted to share a little bit about mine. Over that time period, I worked between 7 to 10 different schools from the elementary, junior, and high school levels. So I got to see a little bit of everybody and everything. We did not have CIRs in Kyoto City. So we were also involved with helping plan cultural events at our schools. And also with our Board of Education, we did English language workshops for the Japanese teachers of English around Kyoto City. So about once a month, we would hold a different type of language-centered theme or textbook activity theme and invite all of the elementary and junior high school level teachers to come in to the Board of Education. So those were pretty fun to be involved with. Before JET program, my background was in linguistics from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, where I'm joining you from today. And I'm guessing a stone throw away from Rurik, perhaps. While I was a student at the university, I did do a study abroad at Konan University in Kobe. And I'm sure, those experiences were really, really helpful when I did eventually get to participate in the JET program. So my time in Japan and as a JET are very near and dear to my heart. Currently, I work as a teacher and an administrator at the Intensive English Institute at the University of Illinois. And some things that I do here, I teach adult ESL learners. So all of our students are 18 or just about to turn 18 and above. Most of them come from other countries on a student visa to study here, or are family members of people in the community. So it can range from immigrants, family of immigrants, refugees. We get a lovely mixture of folks, but mostly these days, especially during the pandemic too, it's students coming that are very focused on getting admissions to a US university. I also work with doing kind of student support services. So I coordinate cultural and social activities for the students. I run a community volunteer program for the students where they're all paired with a conversation partner during their time at the university. And we do a lot of fun outreach related to that. So I've been very, very fortunate that I could really take those experiences from JET and directly, plug them into my role here. So looking at my post-JET path, so I was thinking about this the other day, that time getting ready to get on the plane, packing everything up, getting home, and kind of wondering what I'm going to do, I do very clearly remember being at the after JET and JET program career fair. It was in Yokohama, I believe, when I attended it, and probably the same spot. But I do remember that being really helpful to talk to all of the representatives there from the different institutions, and getting an idea of what that educational path might look like after JET if I wanted to stay in teaching. I first landed up in Canada at the University of Victoria, where I started an applied linguistics program. It was wonderful, really excellent teachers, and I learned a lot, but it was very theoretical and research focused, and a good path if I wanted to become a professor or a researcher. And I realized that didn't exactly fit what I really envisioned. I had such different ideas of what a university professor meant being before I learned a little bit more about the role. And I just realized I really love teaching, and especially with the communities I wanted to work with. So I transitioned and back to my alma mater, the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, where we have a wonderful teaching English as a second language program. So while I was in the program, I got the opportunity to have a teaching assistantship, where I'm working now at the Intensive English Institute. And from that, after I graduated, I was able to get an adjunct position, which are temporary contracts, very common across a lot of US institutions, and then was eventually able to transition to being a full-time person and have health benefits, which was the key thing. It's wonderful having health benefits. From that, a little bit about my path. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about the ESL education landscape in the US and kind of what I was looking at as my options for getting back into teaching. So to start off with, talking a little bit about K through 12. So I myself didn't end up going back into K through 12, but a lot of my friends did. And so I'm going to share a little bit about what they've told me about their experience. But depending on what state you decide you want to teach in, the requirements are all different, but as a rule, they will require an education degree and a teaching license. And the teaching license will be slightly different if it's at the, preschool, kindergarten level versus K through 8 versus high school. So it is a little bit different depending on the level. There is a national shortage of K through 12 teachers. So there's a lot of need for folks at all levels. And for one of my friends, they gave her the ability to work while she was fulfilling the certification requirements. So she was able to get the position. And I think they gave her like a year or a year and a half to get that certification. And that just required taking some classes. I think she was able to do a lot of them at a local community college in the evenings. But now post-pandemic, I'm sure a lot of those can be done online. So that could be quite convenient if you're wanting to get back into K through 12. For US university and college ESL programs, this is more where I've been living post-JET, and that's in university affiliated intensive English programs, shortened to IEPs. There's a lot of acronyms that you'll learn during this process. But basically IEPs, like the Intensive English Institute, prepare students primarily for US universities or professional English. So we do have a lot of working professionals that come in to improve something based on those 4 skill areas. Some IEPs have pathways programs where they have an agreement with the university they're affiliated with. If students go through their program and reach and successfully complete a certain level, then they can have some kind of conditional admission to the university. Intensive English Institute doesn't have a pathways program with University of Illinois, but I believe the local Parkland Community College does. So that is a great thing to consider when you're hunting for different positions is that IEPs that do have pathways programs usually will have a larger number of students, and they'll be looking at hiring instructors more often. In my initial kind of job looking, I think some of the places I looked at, like Arizona State University, has a huge pathways program, and University of California, Berkeley, as well, is always posting things for their instructor pool. One thing about IEPs is that they'll definitely require at least a master's degree in TESOL or something really closely related, like applied linguistics, to teach. So the next one I want to chat a little bit is about university ESL classes. And this will be very, very different depending on what university you're looking at. So talking a little bit about my experiences with the University of Illinois and up in Canada. But a lot of universities will provide skill support type programs for students that are enrolled at their school. So things related to academic writing or perhaps presentation skills, and they'll hire teachers to teach these specific courses. At the University of Illinois, these classes live under the linguistics department. They will require at least a master's degree in TESOL, and sometimes many universities have a preference for PhDs, PhD degrees. And my last on the list, community college ESL programs, which there's a lot of options, especially if you're in Illinois. We're a more populous state with a lot of cities. Most of these programs are focused on adult education, or they might say non-traditional students, which would often be working students, folks taking night classes. Maybe they're immigrants in the community that are taking it to improve, their English for job prospects and such. But they also, many of them offer pathways programs where the students will start their academic career at the community college, get their English level up so that they can succeed in their classes, and then transition to a 4-year university. They also offer classes for students that are enrolled in programs. So similar to what they do at universities, these are really skill support classes, things related to writing, reading, or business English. One of my neighbors across the street does this at our local community college. And these programs will require master's degree in TESOL or the specific content area of the class. For example, if they're going to teach a writing class, a creative writing class or something like that, they might have a creative writing background or PhD, depending on what tract of type of position you're looking for. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about returning to academia. I had a pretty respectable gap between graduating from university and going abroad, working for JET and coming back to North America, about 6 years. So it was a little bit rough initially getting in those classes. So I compiled a list of what I thought would be helpful questions to consider when you're thinking about making the move back to academia. The first one is after you've taken Emily's really helpful tips about soul searching and brainstorming and coming up with, those key values that you want to use in your career and do that exploration. Once you've done that and taken a look on the job boards and LinkedIn and see what positions that those align with. The first question is, with those job postings, what are the certifications or degrees that are listed as required in the job positions? They'll often list preferred sections, but we know we have wiggle room there. We don't need to meet the preferred requirements a lot of times out of not, but what are those required certifications or degrees? The next one is, once you kind of have identified those job postings, you can probably find folks from that institution or company on LinkedIn And so it's helpful to take a look, what degrees or certifications do those current employees at the company or institution hold? So that can give you a sense of what the environment is like there, and if you're going to fit in well with your certifications and degrees, and or what you need to get to fit in well there. And then looking at, does the specific graduate program that you're looking at, is it directly correlated with your goal position? And that's a mistake that I made coming out of JET. I was ready to jump right back into graduate school. The program was wonderful, but it didn't really match well with my goals of where I wanted to be. Okay, my next one is more practically, which graduate programs of the list that you're looking at offer assistantships? I was doing some college application help for my students a few weeks ago, and I recently learned that the average number of graduate programs that students coming out of their undergrads in the US apply to is 8, which was really shocking for me because that's a huge number. All of those applications, all of those application fees, also all those letters of recommendation. Like it's a pretty intensive process. But it is a good thing to look at what types of assistantships do they offer. And it may be possible to find out how many students are able to get those assistantships, like what's the percentage that get them, because that will make a significant difference in terms of cost. I was very fortunate to have a teaching assistantship while I was doing my METESL, so that covered the complete cost of the tuition while I was a student. The next question, oh, I listed it twice because it's so important, is what professional development opportunities or funding does your graduate program offer? Some programs are quite generous in the opportunities and funding that they give. When I was a TA, I had, I think, $500 available to use each academic year towards attending conferences or doing online courses, or working on a type of certification. And there were also kind of in-house professional development workshop things that were available too. And that is a big important part of your graduate program. Going to TESOL as a student is a lot cheaper, but it's even better if your program can help you cover those costs. Okay. And then another, I realized how am I doing on time, Rurik?
You're fine on time. You have at 7 to 10 more minutes if you'd like.
Okay, good. All right. Sorry, I just was looking at the clock. I just have a couple more slides, so my apologies. And that question here, what is the institution's employment rate for alumni? So if you would love to work at a university or a particular community college, you can often find out those stats on and how many graduates of that program go on back to work at that university or in the community. Okay. So the last question I have is kind of not related to teaching, but thinking about the things that you enjoyed from your experience being an ALT, or maybe some of you were Cs or CIRs in Japan, is to consider, is teaching your focus, or did you enjoy a lot of the teaching adjacent roles that you had to put on, many hats while we were in Japan? So if you enjoyed a lot more of those teaching adjacent type of activities or responsibilities, some things to consider might be looking at careers in higher education or student support staff. So some of those roles might be being in student affairs or engagement, being an academic advisor, study abroad, language exchange coordination. And also there's roles within diversity and inclusion affairs. And most universities are making that, I would say, not a highlight, but putting a strategic kind of focus and resources into increasing their diversity and inclusion on their campuses. So there's a lot of potential overlap between things that you did on JET and things that would be really useful with roles within these branches of I guess, higher education careers. So here is my contact information on the slide here. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions outside of this, this context. I'll also put my slides in the chat now as well. But thank you so much, everyone, for your time and your patience.
All right. Thank you so much. That was an amazing talk. Very, very helpful to hear your path from JET to education, and also hearing the other options that you're aware of when it comes to rejoining work in education and teaching in the US. So yeah, really great talk. So we'll move into the panel discussion now. So of course, I'm going to give each of our speakers a moment to talk, but if anyone has a comment or thought on the questions that I have sourced here, please feel free to put those in the chat and we can hear what we all have to say. So the first question I have is, I guess it could equally go to both of our speakers, so I'll give you each a second to think about it. But I got two separate questions that I don't really think have a possible answer at all, sort of related to, like, why does JET have to end, or why is it why was it so good to be in JET, and that sort of amorphous feeling. But I'm going to try and synthesize those questions to, what do you think are some strategies for getting over or letting go of a good job that had to end, I guess. Because not everyone's JET experience was perfect, but there are definite highlights, and there's a definite end to your contract in JET. So how do you move on from a good thing like that?
I like that. And yes, absolutely. I think it's true that there's a something special about JET, but I do think part of that, honestly, is the stage in our lives when that happened. I have talked to a few people who have redone JET. I think it's, you have to have been back for 5 years, maybe even 10. Anyway, doesn't matter. They were not able to recapture the magic. And it's not that they didn't have a good time. It's just that it didn't feel quite so blessed. There's a synergy that happens when you're young, as most of us were when we did it. I did it right out of college, which I think is kind of the most typical path. And I was making bank. I was in a small town, and every time I insisted that they actually deposit my paycheck into my bank, because the first time I got that giant envelope full of money, I thought, and now I want to mug myself. So part of it, I think, is the time that it happened. And it does have to end. I don't know if any of you met any of those super long-term expats in Japan, but they get pretty weird. And so you didn't have to step into that. So silver lining. In terms of kind of reorienting yourself to the present, to your new life in the US, what I would say is think about what elements were part of your life in Japan that you really want to continue. Some of it obviously is impossible. I would give almost anything if there were a Japanese convenience store near me. But I can't make that happen. What I can make happen is stuff kind of about me, right? My personal life post-JET. And so the stuff that I've really worked to recapture is the stuff where I feel like I'm helping. The parts where I have pretty good boundaries around my work life. Not that I didn't go on plenty of like random PTA trips and, things that involved a beer at 7 a.m, but I didn't bring a whole lot of work home with me. And that's a boundary I've kept. And I've kept some community engagement that was really important to me when I was a JET. And I was in a small town, which I think threw me into that community in a way that I don't get because I'm in Denver now, but I've worked to recapture some of that. So think about the definable pieces of that feel really crucial. You might even write them down somewhere and see what kinds of steps you can think of to kind of regain that. Because again, you can redo JET, or you can try, but it's just not going to be the same. You're not going to be 22 again. You're unlikely to wind up in a place that feels as magical. For a lot of us, that's the first time we lived overseas in that way, right? Jenny mentioned that she also did a study abroad. I think a lot of us did that, but that's a different experience, right? Not that it wasn't also magical, but as a student, right? It was very much like my student life in the US, but it was in Japan. So there's a difference to that versus something like JET. So I think some of it's just going to always be nuts gushy because it just is. But some of it is stuff that you can grab onto and put into your life, but you have to define it. Sort of my non-answer. Jenny, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I was just going to say I completely and wholeheartedly agree with you. And I think that's a really great way to articulate that feeling of most of us were right out of college, really young, all of that excitement of being a professional, maybe for the first time, and being in, I would say, such a special environment where we're with other peers that are in the same life stage as us, similar levels of energy. So you have a lot of really great synergy with those energies and goals. And yeah, I don't know if it's possible for any experience, to be the same as when you experienced it for the first time. Like you can only read a book for the first time once. But I wholeheartedly agree with your suggestion to really sit down and think about what were the concrete elements of that experience that were so, I would say, important and meaningful to you, and think about what are the ways that you can get in touch with those feelings again. And I'm very similar with Emily in that I found a lot of the most rewarding parts were helping people, helping students learn about other cultures, helping them have these new experiences, and facilitating that type of thing. So taking that, I guess, love of helping into, back into your community, and yeah, I think it's bittersweet. It's definitely bittersweet. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think I never thought about it that way too, that you sort of fall in love with the moment, not necessarily the job itself, and reframing it that way, and thinking over the what you loved about that time, and trying to really reflect on what maybe wasn't so special about the job itself, that you can still find those things somewhere else. Like, that's really important. So yeah, thank you both for your answers there. I have a question that's more for Emily, but Jenny, if you have any thoughts, go for it. So Emily, you did mention that you didn't want to give specific job paths, I guess for fear of pigeonholing JETs into certain things, but what are some career paths that you do think JETs might be suited for, but not necessarily uniquely suited for, or necessarily suited for, but what have you noticed JETs might be good at?
Yeah. So overall, this probably won't surprise most of you. Overall, where I see JETs kind of over selecting, if you will, into careers would be things like certainly education, K-12 and higher ed. I worked in higher ed also for 13 years after grad school. So things related to education. Then I see a lot of folks going, oh, and by the way, that includes things like student services and such, as Jenny mentioned. Then I see a lot of folks going into government kinds of things. There are apparently so many of us in the Foreign Service that there's like a JET club, like a sort of a Foreign Service specific JET Alumni Association. So government, particularly with a sort of international or helping focus. Certainly things like translation, localization, those kinds of things. And then a fair few folks look to go into things that are pretty directly related to international relationships, mostly with East Asia, but a little bit all over the place. Now, certainly people go on to do things like accounting, biology, whatever else. But those are the areas where I see the most focus from folks. And it certainly mirrors my own path. I did the higher ed thing for a while. And now I don't do a ton right now with folks who are on the other side of international. So I don't, for example, get a lot of expats in the US looking for jobs, but I do get a lot of repats. So I get a lot of JET alums, I get a lot of Peace Corps alums. So, that I get to continue helping folks in that way. But those are probably the largest areas where I see folks selecting. And I think it looks a little bit like many of us in here. Jenny, do you have anything to add?
I'm thinking of my friends from my JET program days. I think a fair number of them also went on to work at international schools in other countries. That seemed to be a pretty popular path. One of them's down at an international school in Vietnam. There's several really excellent international schools in Japan, but I've heard it's typically most difficult to get a placement at the international schools in Japan. But if someone really loves that international teaching experience, and they're really excited to continue to stay, mostly I think like first grade through 6th or 5th grade, those are a great option to explore too. I believe they usually look for folks with education backgrounds or subject matter specialties. So my friend's subject matter specialty was history. So I think he also has the JET ESL experience too. Mm-hmm. And that's all I can think of at the moment.
Yeah, I think, education is a fairly direct link to the JET experience. So, we all have some sort of passion for education, I think Emily mentioned, but not necessarily for teaching itself. So, I think both of you have some a lot of experience seeing what people do with teaching, and then with other avenues that still have that touch of education or conveying information in some way. So, excellent. Now, one question that I have for more for Jenny, but Emily, also feel free to weigh in. How do you think teaching in JET prepared you, or maybe misprepared you, for teaching in the US? What were your expectations coming out of JET, and how did they align or not align so much with the teaching here?
Well, I think one of the key differences was that I was transitioning to working with adult learners for the first time, and all of my experience had been at the kind of first through high school years, and usually very well, across so many schools, it really depended on the teacher I was working with how much input I had in the classroom. Like, it would vary between just helping out with certain types of speaking activities and doing conversations to students, with letting me make the lesson plans and activities, and kind of, saying it can be your show today. So I think that range in experiences was really helpful with seeing all of the parts of what could make up a good lesson, from the very single activity level of how the logistics of this going to work with doing this particular activity with this huge number of students. And especially if you want to go into K through 12 ESL, some kind of a lot of variation in those class sizes depending on the type of ESL instruction at the school. Growing up, I know we had what they call push in and pull out style instruction, where teachers would be working with just a couple of students. But my cousin is an instructor at an elementary school in Chicago, and I think those can have pretty large class sizes. So JET can definitely help you prepare for managing a classroom of a small number to very large numbers of students. And let's see, for preparing for adult learners, I think that level of energy and positivity that we learn to cultivate on the JET program is really helpful for adult language classes, because you might have students that are working, that have families, that maybe are tired or didn't have time to do things before class. So being able to keep that energy up, bring them the positivity, can really help classes go more effectively and be more fun for everyone. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I loved about JET, which was difficult at the time, is that every day would be something a little bit different. So it's really hard to kind of prepare for some things in advance. So it really teaches you to think on your feet and be comfortable with rolling with the changes, which I think is great for any kind of job scenario, but especially with teaching too, because anything can happen, in your classroom.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, and it's absolutely true. And a lot of those skills are applicable in broader careers as well. So, for example, you actually have proof if you did teach in Japan, you have proof that you can do public speaking, right? Mm-hmm. Americans are terrified of public speaking. It's not something people venture into willingly. So if that's going to be part of a role that you might play, even outside of education, if you want to talk about things like your communication skills, I was actually just bringing up my resume because I know I had written this. So I actually have, under my summary section, I have a little point in there that's exceptional interpersonal communication and rapport building skills as shown by experiences living and working abroad and by facility with language. So, that's a huge skill set that you don't necessarily get in other roles. I have demonstrated interest and aptitude for building intercultural bridges, things like that. So there are actually a lot of things that your JET experience can translate to if you can wrap your mind around it. And that honestly is the challenge.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I was in a session one of my colleagues was doing a few years back at TESOL, talking about teachers that wanted to transition into other fields and how they could talk about their teaching skill sets and use those on job applications in maybe fields they hadn't had experience before. And I wholeheartedly agree that the public speaking, your time on JET also made you incredibly resourceful with trying to find creative ways to solve issues or come up with ideas, and especially with being in so many different contexts. Yeah, we are great, come up with something out of limited resources, people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for those answers. Yeah, it's a unique situation that requires developing those unique skills. So those were the 3 questions I was given so far. If anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to speak up now or pop the question in the chat. I'll give a minute or two for people to click away if they're typing. But while we're yeah, go for it.
Sorry, Rick. I just wanted to mention that I did put that values exercise into the chat, but I also did send it to Rick. So if you can't get it to download, which I know is often problematic if you're on a phone, I've sent it to him so he can send it out afterwards as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll send a follow-up to everyone who attended and who registered. I do have a quick question, Emily. Do you recall how you want people to sign up if they are interested in the one-on-one session?
Yeah.
On how we did it last year.
Yeah, what we did last year is you just tell me when you're ready, and I actually have a direct scheduling link that I will turn on. It's turned off right now. I will send it out to you, and then folks can sign up right through that. And I think I just called it, Chicago JETAA career counseling sessions. I called it something pretty obvious. So I'll just turn that back on when we're ready to go, and share the link with you. It should be the same link as last year, but you don't have to go dig through and find that again.
Okay.
I'll send it.
All right. And then I'll send that to the attendees. And then if not all the attendees sign up, then JETAA Chicago members can also sign up.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Jenny and Emily, do you have any other just final thoughts? Before we get to that, all right, Serena just posted in the chat. We'll get to that first. So Emily, you mentioned doing tour groups. How did you get into that as another path Jets can get into?
Yeah. So what I did was fairly, well, it wasn't one-off, but it wasn't regular. So I actually got, I don't remember how, I got introduced to a Japan-specific travel agency here in Denver. And I don't, just a friend of mine told me about them or something, but they're all Japanese nationals. And so I think I started with them just doing some basic, like some translation of their brochures and things, or something like that, something kind of simple. But they were talking about tour groups, and they had, it was mostly elementary kids, and they would come for like a week and see various places. But it was serendipitous more than anything. They wanted native English speakers because the kids, we went to Loveland and a few other places, but in Loveland in particular, the students had an overnight homestay. So I went out with them. We went to Rocky Mountain National Park, and it was actually really fun. And then I was sort of the liaison if any of the homestay parents had questions. And I did a little bit of light translation for the guides at the park, which was, it was kind of like being in Hokkaido. Kuma wa deru zo. So if you're interested in that, I would say look at things like travel agencies. And you know what, Serena, I've never taken the JLPT, so I don't know. I was not very aware of it when I was in Japan. And then I got back, and by the time I sort of learned that it was even a thing, I thought, I don't know, man, my yomikaki is so poor that I am not going to do well on it. I'm functionally illiterate in Japanese, but I speak quite well. So I can't tell you. I call it conversational. And so, by the way, on that translation work with the Rocky Mountain National Park Rangers, there was stuff I could not manage. Like they would mention, like, be careful, they are badgers. I was like, I don't know that in Japanese. Wolves, good. Bear, deer, badgers, less so. Do we have any porcupines? I know that word. So, for what that's worth.
Yeah, I think the JLPT kind of spiked in popularity much later on.
Yeah.
If it was even around, and in what shape, I don't know what shape it took in the 90s, if it was.
Yeah, I think it existed, but it was not as big a deal. And it certainly wasn't something that we discussed.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just the JLPT is sort of a weird thing because there's almost no test user demand. When I say test user, I mean people that use the scores. There's a lot of test taker demand, but there's no real supply side incentive for a
Yeah.
Japanese proficiency test because the test score demand is very low. So
Yeah. Well, and what I always tell people as well is if you want to be in a field where you are using your Japanese language, and first of all, those are the only people who are going to understand what it even means, but give a definition, right? Don't just put like N2, because seriously, nobody outside of our community has any idea what that means. And so, and I think the actual, I don't remember if it's your scores or the test itself, but it actually says somewhere on it. So like, it's like near native proficiency and that kind of thing. You can definitely recapture that. And then for things that do use Japanese language skills, you can put your scores on there. But yeah, nobody else understands it. And so if you're looking to do translation work for like French language, they have no idea what that means.
yeah, the tiered test system is also sort of awkward in the
Yeah.
US as well, trying to communicate that you passed the level test. Like that's also sort of weird.
Yeah, it's very Japanese.
Yeah.
Anyway, I also want to get to this question here about the career changers. Definitely something I work with a lot. One of the things I recommend, if one of the particular questions you have when you're changing fields is salary, is actually check out, there's a Colorado-based job board that I will put in the chat here, because the state of Colorado, there are a couple other states that have signed on since, but I don't think anyone else has put it into action yet. The state of Colorado requires salary range postings when you have a job posting. So I'm going to throw a job board I like into the chat here. It's called Andrew Hudson. And then start with things like that. So start looking at stuff in Colorado, because you will see salary ranges posted. The other stuff, the workflow, the benefits, those are harder to ascertain in advance. And I think if you're looking to change something like stability for a new field, the best advice I can give you is to find other people who work in those fields and talk to them. Do an informal kind of informational interview where you just say, hey, Jenny, I did JET as well, and I see that you're teaching ESL at the university level. I'm really interested in what that looks like. I'd love to chat with you about a typical workday for you and really see if I can get a feel for it. I don't really understand the workflow of a field like this, and I understand how I would figure out things like where I can even find jobs. So you can reach out to that. So the JET community is a really helpful one as well. And then I see another question, but Jenny, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I completely agree. It's usually best to start with talking to someone that's possibly at the organization that you'd like to work with, or something that's in the same field. And especially, I have not done this so much myself, but I've heard that like on LinkedIn, I think they've changed some of the features on there where you can connect with people that are not in your direct network and send messages and start conversations that way. And there's some people that identify themselves as being willing to talk and join networking groups and things. So I think, yeah, those conversations are a great way to find out, about if you think you'd be a good fit somewhere. Yeah, really depending on the field, or if you can find also like school alumni associations, or if you were part of any Greek systems, they often offer those opportunities, and maybe people may be also a little more candid in those associations too. But yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Talking first. Some, I don't know, maybe some organizations or maybe the jobs might be things that you could get experience with, maybe volunteering as well. And so I've suggested that to friends as well that wanted to get into something like try volunteering in something that's similar and see kind of how you like it. One of my friends did this that wanted to go into teaching, so she was volunteering at a church ESL program and getting that experience of working with the students and really liked it. Others didn't like it so much, so that if volunteering is an option.
Yeah, yeah, and I love the volunteering idea. Just make sure you're not overcommitting. Some volunteer programs want a lot of hours, and you can get a little overcommitted. So, and Julia, I have put my sample resume and that line into the chat. If you have trouble with it, let me know. I'm happy to send it out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, did you want to say anything else about that in particular? So, do you want to drill down into that idea of how do you put personality or sort of these like soft non-cognitive skills on a resume?
Yeah, it's definitely the trick, I think. And one of the things that I have really noticed is that employers are really excited about soft skills, which is a phrase I hate, but
I do too. I'm sorry I used it, but
there's not a better way to put it is the thing, right? I've been trying to come up with a replacement for it, and there isn't one. Soft in terms of not measurable, I think, right? Like I can't say I'm 75% good at international rapport building, but those are really important. And so look through the sample resume I threw in there. Emotional intelligence is definitely part of it. The problem is that outside of places like higher education, if you put in emotional intelligence, other people are like, oh, what does that even mean, right? And so I would say, go ahead and look at that. So the reason I put the education sample into the chat is that's my resume. I changed it up a little bit, but that's actually from a JET resume presentation I did a few years ago. It might be a little old because I don't remember when that was, but look through that summary at the top of mine and see if that spurs any ideas in you, because that's definitely the trick, particularly with those things that are less definable. So have a look through that. You can look through the other stuff as well, just as it might relate to your experience. And you'll see that I have some stuff that is a little more measurable. I have things like I think I have public speaking experiences to audiences large as 200. So I have some things that are kind of a little bit more metrics driven in there, but I have a lot of fuzzy stuff too. So, let me know. And so I would say, go ahead and look through that, see if it sparks any ideas in you. But if you have other questions around that, drop me a line. I'm always happy to chat through it, but also look for those Chicago JETAA appointments, and we can definitely do some resume stuff. I will caution you, if you have resume questions, but you don't know what you want to do, if you don't know what's next for you, I'm going to take you back a little bit further than the resume, because I don't want to make you a beautiful, HR benefits professional resume if what you really want to do is be an artist. So I'll push back in a loving and supportive way a little bit. But if you do have just straight up resume questions, I'm looking to capture X, Y, and Z. I'm happy to work with you on that.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it is about time to wrap up now. So Emily and Jenny, if you have any final thoughts, go ahead. But then other than that, I'll turn it over to Gabe to make some announcements. So yeah, anything, Jenny, Emily?
I'll just add, folks can feel free to contact me. I put the link a little bit earlier to my slides and my contact info in the chat, but I can put my email address in there again. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to meet and hear from you, Emily. Mm-hmm. And thank you so much, Rurik, for inviting me this morning.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for both of you being wonderful speakers and having such wonderful advice. I'm sure everyone appreciates all of the tips and strategies. So, yeah.
I just put my slides in the chat as well. And here, I'll put my email address in again.
Awesome. So yeah, Gabe, is there any upcoming JETAA Chicago stuff that people should be aware of?
Sure. Thank you, Rurik. And Rurik, thank you again so much for putting this together. For those of you that don't know, Rurik is our networking coordinator, as you can tell by the background, but he puts a lot of work into this event as well as the Japanese language nights throughout the year. So thank you again for making this happen, Rurik. And thank you very much to Jenny and Emily for joining us and giving us these few hours on your Saturday morning. We really appreciate it. As far as upcoming events, we have our monthly meeting on Monday, actually, and we're going to do a quick virtual happy hour afterwards. Just an end of the year little game party. So if you'd like to join us, the meeting starts at 6:30, probably goes for about half an hour, and then we'll start the hangout a little bit after that. We are in the process of scheduling 2 more events. Prior to the pandemic, we did what was called the Bowl Nenkai, which was a bowling night at a local bowling alley in Chicago. Typically it followed the December meeting, but I'm still working on nailing down a venue for this year. So it's probably not going to be this week, but maybe the following week. But we'll be announcing that as soon as we have the details. And then also in early next year, we will be hosting our annual Shinenkai, which is our New Year's celebration. It's a fundraiser. It's our biggest annual fundraiser, and it will benefit one of the local partner organizations that we have. We've done the Japan America Society of Chicago in the past, the Japanese American Service Committee, the Japanese Culture Center, and a few others as well. But we'll be announcing more information about that soon. And I think that's it. Unless I'm missing something, Alexis or Rurik, you guys sometimes do better than I do. But thank you. Oh yeah, and happy birthday, Rurik. We forgot to mention it. This is Rurik's birthday, so hopefully he's going to have an amazing rest of his day now that he has wrapped up with the event.
Yeah, I just got back from a big trip to Japan, so I will probably be just relaxing a bit this weekend, recovering from jet lag. So I wouldn't rather spend my birthday any other way.
Always a nice way to celebrate, just taking it easy. And then Alexis, you're probably going to remind us that we have to take a photo because you are excellent at that.
You know it. I think Rurik was actually on top of it, but
Okay.
yes, I was here just in case.
Yeah, Alexis, let me shut the recording off first, so we'll end the recording now.